We're not moving as much. The environment's changed. We're changing the way in which we develop.
Our children are now more sedentary than ever before. Every child that I have ever seen with a developmental disorder, all of them have primitive reflexes still active.
Look at the way they move. Watch how they run. There's brain regions that are not coordinating efficiently. You can't have speech and language if these reflexes haven't switched off, haven't been put to sleep.
And what the goal is to take that reflex from an involuntary state to a voluntary state. But you can only do that through movement.
Can they connect with their movements first? Can they connect with their emotions first?
And then that child can flourish and thrive in a way that nature intended.
In a more sedentary world overflowing with screens, stress, and processed foods, our brains are under constant pressure, especially those of our children. Brains Under Attack is a podcast that exposes modern environments and teaches us how to build healthy brains in an unhealthy world. Children are struggling a lot more than they were before. You know, that's a fact. We've got all of these behaviours and symptoms, challenges associated to autism and dyslexia and ADHD, and kids are being diagnosed. So, I guess what it would be good to explain. I think I agree with you about things can be changed, but what's going on? What's going wrong now? We started at birth and 25%. And we talked about this optimal path or healthy brain development that's going to help your children be free from some of these behaviours and developmental challenges. What's going on in children's development now, and what the parents need to be really aware of to help keep them on this track, this blueprint for healthy brain development that we talked about.
Well, what's happening, Steve, is modern environments are changing at speeds like, we couldn't even comprehend. Technology is engaging them at levels where these kids are far more sedentary than they ever were. We've got now slings and we've got car seats that they don't even move from. So modern environment, we've got nutrition now, which is, heavy dyes and food colorings. Well, none of this should even be allowed for consumption for children, in my opinion. The CDC.
How's that affecting their brain? How is being constricted
movement,
and not moving affecting the development? Because like we said, 25%, that brain is 25% developed.
Yeah,
so now it's got to develop.
Yeah. So what happens, Steve, is you have these primitive reflexes, and only movement and that interaction with the child, that engagement with the child, but I'm talking human engagement, not tech engagement, is the only way that child builds these social and emotional and behavioral skills in the first early stages, because that's why the gross motor skills develop. That child won't have the ability to have fine motor skills in the beginning, because the brain, that part of the regions of the brain switch on later on around 3 years old. This is when they start to break the world up. So in the beginning, we have to understand the brain develops with gross motor control. And gross motor control can only develop if the child isn't restricted as much, or sat sedentary, only staring at a screen, let's say, and is not given stimulated foods, where the child's nervous system is being stimulated like it's under stress. Also, breathing, is the child breathing through its mouth? All these have a correlation.
Yeah. So specifically, these systems in the brain, this bottom-up development of the brain is not developing as it should from early life. Baby,
at
toddler,
conception, because of the health of the parents,
and it's creating knock-on effects down the road. So specifically, the early years of life, like a child, what is it that they need to be doing specifically? How much of it a week? What sort of milestones? The primitive reflexes.
So
how they influence everything.
So the primitive reflexes. So what happens is, in order to access the higher functions, you've got to put these in, you've got to get better control of these reflexes. So these reflexes, like the rooting reflex, in order for the child to feed, has to integrate. It's what we call switch off or put to sleep. They have to be put to sleep. Now, if they're not put to sleep, it's going to interfere with accessing these advanced functions or other regions of the brain. That's where the prefrontal lobes, but you can't access these higher functions if you remain in these reflexive involuntary control systems. So the system has to mature. And then these reflexes can only ever be put to sleep if they perform specific movements, the blueprint movements, what we call milestones. Now they're an absolute blueprint. So what happens is if the child doesn't roll, let's say, because the child doesn't have full vision at this stage and it doesn't have full hearing of sounds, it doesn't understand language or words or any of that. It can't really communicate effectively. It's non-verbal communication. So it sees the mother engaging and smiling with the child, and the child starts to smile back. So it mirrors that level of non-verbal communication. You start to make noises and you speak to them like a baby, and then they start babbling back. In a sense, that's almost mirroring the child, but it's developing these signals in the brain, them synaptic connections. And the more we do that, it starts to develop the myelination process. The signals now get stronger. So now they can start making the noises more. They can make them rotations, them turning over and sitting up independently. Now the muscle tone starts developing because they've repeated the movement for long enough. So they've got better and better at it. The same with crawling. All these are sequential. They have to be done. If they are missed at any point, then it causes underdeveloped in them parts because the signal wasn't activated. The synaptic connections weren't activated. So it can't then perform these higher functions later on, like reading and speaking. And now we're getting a lot more non-verbal kids. But you can't get them, you can't have speech and language if these reflexes haven't switched off, haven't been put to sleep, because there's almost like a restriction, a blockage. And remember, the brain's priority is only survival. So if you're in reflexive states and its main priority is survival, then it needs to come out of survival into creation. But in order for it to come into creation, we've got to be able to switch off these reflexes to then have voluntary and conscious control, because we can't have that until we put these involuntary systems to sleep.
I think that's crucial. And that's where my obsession around what we do now as a company and my love of neuroscience now, it becomes from movement. I've been supporting children with movement for 30 years. Now I understand how important movement is. It's not, I used to just try and create sportsmen and women and things like that so that our children can get better at sport. We do that anyway. That's a byproduct of what we do now. However, what I now realize through my work with you, Seb, and understanding and understanding how the brain develops, movement is way more important than producing a Johnny Wilkinson, a Federer, a Venus Williams, or whatever kind of sportsmen and women. Movement is a foundation of brain development. So that's, in my opinion, that's the biggest thing that's changed in the last 30 years, is the fact that our children are now more sedentary than ever before, going right the way back to the age of 3 months. So our children are now swaddled more than ever before. Like you said, they're in car seats now. They're in prams too long. They're watching Peppa Pig too long. All these kind of things that we talk about is stopping our children from moving. Now, if our children...
And Steve, the overprotectiveness of parents now.
Yeah.
Because, there's this almost... It's creating this lack of... it's creating anxiety in a sense, because everything is be careful. I mean, I remember having a young kid on a treadmill and the mother was behind the treadmill and she expressed that she was scared he might fall off. And he'd been, and she believed that he was on the spectrum. And you can watch movement and it tells you everything about the brain. So when you look at individuals with, say, autism or ADHD, look at the way they move, watch how they run, watch how they jog, and you see one arm doesn't move as efficiently as the other arm. And you go, there's brain regions that are not coordinating efficiently, because in order to run efficiently, we need the arm swing, we need the leg swing, and that's all. But there's a huge differentiation between movement on the two sides. That identifies which regions are immature and why these regions can't be accessed. But the moment you take them back to, say, the AT&R reflex, well, there's also a differentiation between the two sides, because one side, they bend the elbow. So the maturity hasn't taken place. Them synaptic connections never, ever created the signal, and it never created the myelination for them to be able to create the separation from head and body and segments. But what we want them to do is we want them to be a fast runner. So I'll get kids in, and fathers especially, he needs to run fast. But before he can run fast, the child struggles to create this synchronicity between head and body control. And we said, before you could even run, you have to get this integrated. You've got to learn these foundational movements first before you can attempt that. Yes, I know he can run, but he's not running efficiently. This is going to cause a major problem moving forward. His career is going to be very short-lived, because you can already see the asymmetries in movement. So movement identifies a lot of what's going on in the brain. And a lot of the spiritualists sort of really started to disconnect because they call it the brain, body and mind, but it's all one. It's one system that's connected. You can't disconnect them. So whatever is going on in the brain, although we look at symptoms of behaviors in what we assess, it's actually the processing unit is what is the input going in. And if the input is not very good, then the output can't be very good. And that's important. You can't put trash into a system and expect an amazing outcome. Doesn't work.
I guess from a parent's point of view, understanding these reflexes is vital, and the role that they play if they're not switched off. Understanding milestones, understanding that a child has to go on a specific journey to help with the development of the brain, and we can encourage that as parents. Let's look at it from a child that is really struggling, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old that is showing heavy symptoms on the autism spectrum, heavy symptoms of any of these other disorders. They're struggling socially, they're struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with all these behaviors. You've helped many children like this. So how do you go back and input that information into the system and help them to overcome a lot of these challenges? Because we're saying you can overcome all these challenges. We're saying by understanding the root cause and where they came from. And there's loads of other factors that we need to talk about. We touched on the parenting and the stress and how you parent is going to affect the outcomes. We talked a little bit about nutrition. We talked about breathing and sleep and everything, but specifically helping these children to overcome these really, really tough disorders and behaviors associated. They're very distressing. As a parent, I've seen my child with some of these behaviors. But how do you start to unpack it? Because we unpack it in a very similar way. Every child that's showing these difficulties, we unpack and we try and input the information back and help them.
It's the blueprint, Steve. That's it. You've got to take them back to the foundational stages. Although we want them to perform at their chronological level, we've got to remove ourselves from believing that just a 10-year-old who's really struggling or is non-speaking. We've got to take him right back. Forget about speech and language. Forget about the words at this stage. The goal is, how connected is this child to his body first? How well can he control movements? Are his primitive reflexes switched off? Have they been put to sleep? Is he in involuntary control? And most of them, well, all of them they're in this involuntary control. So then we go, well, okay, let's look at the environment also, what are parents like? So we take this almost global approach to look at all the different domains for the child. And then what we do is we work at the baseline foundation. So although child wants to do all these advanced things and parents want them to be able to do all these things, but there's no point doing them things just yet because the foundations are still faulty or they've been underdeveloped. So we've got to get the foundations in order because nature has created the blueprint for brain development and the immune system and digestion and your heart rate and your blood pressure and your pH levels. You can even measure them. You know what a healthy heart rate is. You know what healthy blood pressure is. There's metrics to it all. So that's the blueprint, but you've got to follow the blueprint. And if you follow it, then we're not just going, oh, we can now do something about it. The ultimate goal is to try and prevent it and catch it a lot earlier than later.
Yeah. But that's quite key, isn't it? The earlier you catch it.
Early as you can. Yeah, absolutely. Having said that, early as you can, but that it's not the end of the world if, I don't know, we see adults that come to us struggling and things like that, and we still might always go back to these early involuntary primitive reflexes. That's super, super important. So every child that I ever see, whether it's en masse in schools or from an individual point of view, if they have any signs or challenges or symptoms or behaviors associated with disorders, we assess for primitive reflex retention first, because that's, again, like Seb said, that's the blueprint of it. And so if a child, for example, comes to see us with anxieties or worries or stress, well, we would always go back and check the moro reflex, which is a fight or flight response. So if that fight or flight response is still active, well, the child is going to be anxious and worried and stressed because the brain is doing its job and it's still in this involuntary state and a reflexive state of fight or flight. So we've got to go back, assess if these reflexes are still active. And when they are still active, there is an involuntary movement to a stimulus. So it's amazing. So it's not just, we have parents come into us with children, and it's not just Seb or I or some of the other guys in the clinics are saying, oh, you've just got, your child's just got this reflex still active. You can actually see it. There is an involuntary response to a stimulus that happens. So then we give them a set of exercises to go away and do. They do it with us. They go home and do these exercises. And what the goal is to take that reflex from an involuntary state to a voluntary state. But you can only do that through movement. So that's the really, really important thing about everything that we do, is that the brain is neuroplastic. We can change it at any age. The earlier you do it, the better. But every child that I have ever seen with a developmental disorder, all of them have primitive reflexes still active. Now, if we go back and start knocking out these reflexes, it's not an amazing magic wand that they're suddenly going to be an elite athlete or an author or a scientist, whatever. But no, they're not. But we're now at a state where they, we talk about it quite a lot. They're now at the start of the race. So, but whilst these reflexes are still active, our children are not at the start of the race. So if we knock them out, we get them to the start of the race, then they can start to do the things that they want to do or that they've been challenged with before. So if you can knock out these reflexes, that child will then be able to do maths or then be able to do English, but you've still got to practice it and you've still got to get better at it. So the amazing thing, and this is my love of it, and through Seb's guidance along the way for the last 10 years, and I've been listening to him and studying myself and things like that, we can take a child that's really, really struggling with certain behaviors, re-input the information that the brain's missed for whatever reasons, lots of reasons, but it's missed that information, might not crawled, might not have rolled, didn't get enough stimulation, lack of movement, etc. We go back in, put that information, knock these reflexes out, switch them off, and then that child can then start to flourish and thrive in a way that nature intended. So it's so important, and it's going back, and the love of movement. Seb spoke about it quite a lot. We can see a child with neurological delays through how they move, and I'm doing it on maths now, and so is Seb in schools. Our children move worse now than ever before. From a coordinated point of view, I was watching a music lesson the other day, and even the music teacher has been doing it for a long time. Our children can't spin quite as well as they used to. They can't clap quite as well. The rhythm and the timing's not quite as good as it used to be for their chronological age. So we're all slightly behind. And in my opinion, the only reason why that is because of tech, and our children sat watching and playing and doing things on tech more so than ever before. There's my little rant for you.
No, it's fascinating, and I think, from a father's point of view, I quite like, and you guys have got to know me a lot over the last few years, is I like things to be exact. I like to be able to have an answer for everything,
Yeah.
to solve the puzzle. So from that point of view, when we're talking about children with all varying disorders and behaviors, and some are really extreme and some are not so extreme, are we saying that if we get them to a level of movement where all these reflexes are integrated, and when we talk about all these reflexes, there's 10 that are the most important ones.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably we not the episode to break every single one of them down, but I think we'll probably, the next one will break every single one of them down. But if all these 10 reflexes are integrated, my child's at a certain level of movement, and we talk a bit about the senses, don't we, Seb? With the sensory, the eyesight needs to be at a certain level, the hearing needs to be at a certain level, that we can work on vestibular and proprioception and tactile, all the senses, 7, I believe, that are most important, smell, etc. If they're all at a certain level with these systems, then the behaviors will start to disappear, like the extreme behaviors, the behaviors
Absolutely,
of irrational, of
Well,
high anxiety, of
they
not being able to socialize, not being able to understand social cues. Now, all of these behaviors that a lot of parents are seeing in their children nowadays.
Yeah, and also, Steve, just to say, like, we don't want to eliminate anxiety completely, because we need an element of it. If there was a lion who was really hungry and wanted to eat me, I really need a level of anxiety. So I need to know when necessary anxiety and fear is needed anyway. I need to know when to fight and flight type thing. So I've got to be able to have the necessary amounts of them behaviors. Sometimes you might need to, you're playing say football, you need that hyperactiveness in that moment. It's the energy system, it needs it. So we need an element of focus and concentration when we're reading. So we need to have these behaviors, but we don't want to eliminate all the behaviors. Let's say we want a balance of the behaviors. We want regulation. That's the goal. We want good regulation of the emotional system, the behavioral system, and we want to be able to socialize efficiently. But how does a child even read emotions on a person if they can't emotionally regulate themselves? And that's what we tend to see in individuals with autism. So then how could they possibly ever make friends who are emotionally regulated, who can read emotions on themselves? So this all corresponds to everything being connected. It's so important. We've got to connect with ourselves first. And the way we connect with ourselves first is, can they connect with their movements first? Can they connect with their emotions first? And that's important. But can the parents do that also? Because the parents are the environment. And that's really important.
Okay. So if we're saying that a lot of the root causes of these disorders, and there's 400 or so in the DSM-5 manual, more disorders than we can talk about now.
The most expansive medical book, although the psychiatric sort of healthcare model is governed under healthcare, but it doesn't practice like healthcare. But that's a different story. But it's one of the most expanding medical book ever created, and it's still expanding, which I find astonishing if we're trying to find resolvement and solutions. Why are these disorders increasing? Why aren't they reducing? Because they're all set on a set of behaviors. You can't have a brain scan and you can't do a blood test.
No.
So, yeah, it's an interesting question. Psychiatry is interesting. I've always found it interesting. I think there needs to be some major adaptations within that system.
Yeah, definitely. And I think
that's another episode.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you put it in a book and you call it a disorder, it's almost like there's no solution for it, right? And
well, let me just tell you what that book governs, and anyone can check this. It governs things like caffeine disorder, internet disorder, self-defeating personality disorder. The same disorders that book governs has governed, say, Asperger's, which is now a spectrum, by the way, homophobic disorder. So all them were institutionalized, but that's no longer a disorder now because they just decided, forget about it. We don't need that anymore, but we've institutionalized and put them all on antipsychotic medication, but we can just remove disorders when we want and we can add them when we want. And who cares? But the same disorders, like caffeine disorders, and which is obviously it's a habitual disorder. It's not a disorder. I like caffeine. You must like caffeine. We all like a bit of caffeine. Doesn't mean I have a disorder of it if I decide that one day I need to keep my energy levels up because that's the narrative and the research I know. And I've almost
it makes
encouraged
a
and
mockery
influenced.
of the whole thing, doesn't it? When you
So
include
you just
disorders
think,
like that in there, it makes a
yeah,
mockery of everything. Like it's
you
impossible.
wouldn't get that though, Steve, in the actual medical healthcare books. So, you get the Health Professional Council. You wouldn't get disorders which are just almost they're just made up, and I know they're made up, but we could go into this a lot deeper in terms of like how the science was constructed and who funds it and things like that. There's a much bigger picture, but by now we should be having solutions. Like you look at, say, heart attacks, for instance, in healthcare. Although psychiatry is governed like healthcare, but it doesn't work like healthcare. It doesn't practice like healthcare. And the way you can explain that is you look at heart attacks, for instance, and people, the survival rate of just the operation, the procedure needed to put a stent in the individual was much more traumatic than the heart attack itself. So whereas now they have advanced their procedures where the survival rate now for the operation, the surgery is so much better. Whereas you look at psychiatry, it's so much worse. Everything is getting worse. And you just think if we conducted a business where people weren't getting better, but we just created new disorders to explain why the other disorder didn't work and why we couldn't overcome it, or the pill didn't work, we would be out of business.
Yeah.
Because it's a system that just manages and treats. It doesn't look for causes or correlations. And that's the sad thing.
Ultimately, what we're saying, it comes back to the way the child's developed, environmental influences, and ultimately information can be put back in and these behaviors can subside and dissolve and ideally disappear altogether.
We've got to understand the foundational sort of development of the brain. And a lot of people, you look at people with mental health, everything is a top-down, psychological, psychiatric. It's a top-down approach. No one's addressing the foundational sort of bottom-up approach. There's not many people in the healthcare system that I've even heard of primitive reflexes unless they're pediatricians or pediatric neurologists. Other than that, you're not really going to get many healthcare professionals like OBs or gynecologists or obstetricians or anything like that even heard, or in the mental health world, psychiatrists wouldn't have heard of primitive reflexes, nurses. So it's absolutely foundational. No one's really looking at primitive reflexes in a way to try and get that child's foundations in order first. And I think that's where it's crucial. And then the environment plays a huge part, Steve. Movement plays a huge part. Stress plays a huge part. If a child's in a stress state, Steve, in this protective state, it can't be in growth. If it's in fight and flight, it can't create these synaptic connections. So it's important we address all these domains in order to get the best development for the child and for them to access their potential. And look, this isn't for the parent whose child is neurodiverse, let's say, and is thriving and they're content and they're fulfilled. This isn't really for them. This is for the ones who are really suffering and they're not getting the answers like the people we get, like we went through. And I think that's important to differentiate. The obese person who's really happy with being obese, well, the personal trainer is not for you and the nutrition isn't for you. Healthy nutrition and fitness isn't really for you. But there's also obese people who are really struggling and they don't like the way they look. So I think it's important that this is guided towards those who are trying to look at it from a different narrative that they may have never accessed.
No, it's yeah, it's just I know that a lot of parents out there that are hungry for this, and they can see that there's a reason for this. Like there's a reason for all of this huge increase and these alarming rises in all of these disorders. And then there's other groups of people that are like, this is genetic, there's nothing we can do about it, it's just one of those things, you know. And then you've got Donald Trump coming out and saying actually it's because mum took a paracetamol when she was pregnant. So there's all these factors that are going on, there's all these schools of thought. So it's just kind of addressing that we understand that there's so many extremes to all of these disorders, but there's a way of going back to the root cause and putting in the information and helping to treat even someone that is got severe autism to some child that's just, you know, maybe struggling with a bit of impulse control or
anxiety or anything like that. Absolutely, Steve. And remember, it's all the great thing about the methods that we try and promote is this has been known for 100 years about primitive reflexes. Like this isn't something we've created. We've just I've had it an absolute duty because I needed answers because I weren't getting them. I was going through the healthcare system. I love it in certain parts. I think they do some amazing stuff in surgery and stuff. But as for psychiatry and as for limitations, unfortunately, I can't really get on with that. I can't connect with that well because you don't really get explanations. So this is where it's given us an opportunity from our own experiences, personal experiences, to say, look, there is this other way that you may have never heard about. And let me just explain how I helped, my children and who are thriving. So I want you to understand that there is this way. And if you're not struggling, you're not suffering, listen, no problem. But this is the way that worked for me. I went down that route. That didn't work for me. To label my child and limit my child just didn't sit well with me because the brain has this amazing ability to reorganize and to create these new synaptic connections and prune ones that are a little bit stronger in certain areas or underdeveloped in areas. And we want to try and develop the ones that are underdeveloped, and we want to lower the ones that are overstimulated, and we want to try and create this synchronicity between this whole brain. That's the goal. We want it to communicate and process information well. But there is a blueprint. You're not going to just turn around and go to the builder and say, well, look, the architect has created this blueprint. Forget about that and forget about that. Crawling's not important. Sitting's not important independently. They'll do it in their own time. It don't work like that. You've got a blueprint for things.
Yeah.
There's a system you have to follow. And that is not encouraged enough. And now we're in a state where we're trying to almost find excuses to try and prove that, that is causing that or that. Every child with autism is different to another child with autism. So it's unique. So a child with severe autism, like you spoke about, Steve, they may have all 10 reflexes unintegrated. They tend to have more. They have less control of their bodies. They have less connection to their bodies. You look at the parents, one's very overprotected, the other one's very challenging. You go, there's this constant, that's the commonalities I've witnessed in my own clinical practice. We've got to get the balance right with it all. So then we go, well, okay, what about a child who's then mild? He's also been, well, that's what the polygenic system is. That's what the psychiatric symptom checklist is. Me and you could have one out of the 10 symptoms. So I could have 1 to 10 as the symptoms. I get diagnosed with autism or ADHD or depression or anxiety, whatever, OCD. But you could have 10 to 20. So we've only got one symptom in common, but we get diagnosed with the same problem. Bearing in mind, the environment's totally different. The nutritional habits are totally different. The movement is totally different. Parenting is totally different. But we've got one symptom in common, based on a polygenic system,
Mm.
polythetic system, sorry.
Amazing conversation as always. I think we should leave it there.
Yep. Awesome. Seb, brilliant, mate.
There you go. Brilliant, guys.
Cheers, Seb.
Lovely to see you as always.
Nice one, mate. Take care, buddy. Bye.